Hi, everyone. I'm delighted today to bring a very special guest. He is Mr. Phil Fox, and Mr. Phil Fox and I have interacted a little bit before, and I'm just starting to learn about Native Americans and Native American history. And Mr. Phil Fox is a Native American, and he has a lot of firsthand knowledge on a lot of the issues with Native Americans. I'm just realizing I have this running somewhere. Okay, I had another screen open.
I do that
Sorry.
all the time.
So anyway, and I just listened to Mr. Phil Fox talk to Mark Charles on his channel. I listened to a portion of that video, a good portion of it actually, and I found it really fascinating because he and Mark Charles, who's written a book, have a lot of information about our history that I don't think they teach us, and I don't think that Americans are fully aware of the history of our Native Americans, the people who were first here in the colonies, who were here before everybody came. And so when they say that Christopher Columbus discovered America, that really rubs the Native Americans wrong because, of course, they were in America. So he did not discover America. It had already been discovered by the Native Americans who came over here, possibly by the Bering Straits. I'm not sure exactly how. But anyway, without further ado, let me introduce Mr. Phil Fox.
Hey, everybody. Nidosha, Midishi, Maihagadesh, Hetz, Mabisigits. My name is Philip Fox, or Mr. Phil Fox is what I go by on YouTube. And you can find me on all those socials. I have a YouTube page. Just Google or go to YouTube and look for Mr. Phil Fox. And Maihagadesh is my native name. It's translated into the one who eliminates the foreigner, or a more simple name, I guess, could be defeats the enemy. And I was given that name by my grandfather, who was a war veteran, and he gave me that name, and I wear that name proudly because mainly because that name, I do not fit the title, or I do not fit for that name, because that name is preserved for warriors who have gone and fought physically. But my grandfather said, the only reason I can give you this name is because you wake up every morning and you fight for all of us spiritually. And so I can carry the name defeats the enemy because of the work and the ministry that I do have. I have a ministry called Drops of Hope Ministries. We have a website. It's the full name, dropsofhopeministries.com. And although I am Native American, but my ministry is not primarily geared towards Native American ministries. It's actually, my emphasis is dealing with Native American issues, topics, and those types of things. But it's primarily to contextualize the gospel message to be able to apply to any and all contexts. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm a family man. I have a wife and two daughters, one teenage age, and the other one is elementary age still, about to turn into middle school age. And yeah, and I'm very accessible. So, if there's, and some of these things, I need to preface as well. I do not hate America. I do not hate any people group whatsoever. And when I'm using the language, it's purely to teach. And so you're going to hear a lot of us versus them, we, them, native versus Euro ethnic. You're going to hear those types of terms, but that does not mean that I hate any one people group, because first of all, I am a follower of Jesus Christ. He is my Lord. He is my King. He is my Savior. And I identify with him first above all things. So let me make that clear before people try to, because there are some people within some camps who try to turn the things that I would say into this whole racial divide of CRT and all of those types of things. So I just want to make that brutally clear and brutally honest up front, is that I do not subscribe to all the proponents of CRT and all of that, but I'm merely trying to help people to understand that there is a false narrative, sort of what SJ was referring to in her opening, that there is a narrative that is being taught that is not consistent with the actual reality of what happened in this country. So that's a little bit about me. So thank you, SJ, and it's an absolute honor to be on this platform.
Oh, well, thank you. So I have a lot of questions for you. And so I hope but it has to do a lot, kind of, it has to do a little bit with what you were talking about with Mark Charles. But
Mm-hmm.
when you say there's a false narrative, and I'll just tell you basically what we learn in school as youngsters. We learn our history, our American history talks about Christopher Columbus in 1492 coming over here on the Nina and the Santa Maria and the Pinta and discovering America. And there were natives here, we're told, but the natives just sort of either people battled with them to move them from the land, or they willingly moved from the land. That's sort of what we're told. And it's sort of glossed over exactly what happens. And so until Americans kind of look under the table, look under that cloth and see exactly where were the Native Americans, how many Native Americans were there, and what tools were used to remove them. Because I went into Dahlonega, Georgia a long time ago. I was in Dahlonega, Georgia.
Love Dahlonega.
And I remember, oh my gosh, it's incredibly beautiful. Dahlonega is so beautiful. And I remember seeing this sign that said something like the Trail of Tears. And I really didn't know what that was. And so then I found out, well, that was the trail that the Native Americans had been forced to walk from beautiful Dahlonega, Georgia, all the way to Oklahoma. And Oklahoma, I have never been there, so I really can't speak to its beauty, but I suspect it's not quite as beautiful as Dahlonega. I could be wrong if you're in Oklahoma and here on the channel, but it just sounds like a pretty awful thing that happened. And so did you want to maybe fill in some of the blanks? I have a lot of blanks there, but that's sort of my basic, what I know about history as far as Native Americans, very little.
Yeah, no, it is a very generic commentary when you come to your social studies class and you get to the month of November. And shout out to Slam for sure and Finding Truth. I was on his channel, so go and check that out too. Went over some of this information there as well. But yeah, so you sort of come and then you have your unit on Native Americans, and it does have this this very dry, generic, and then you get into your tribal studies. Well, there's the America's breadbasket, and these were semi-nomadic tribes, and then you move on, and that's literally what it is. And here's a quick little story. My daughters had a friend, and they were middle school age. My oldest daughter at that time, now she's high school age, but she was just getting into middle school age, and so this was just a few years ago, and her friend was older, and she was getting ready to transition from middle school age to high school age, and so we were getting ready all to go to the local swimming hole. And so we picked up a couple of their friends, and I had my traditional Native music playing. And I actually listened to it. I'm a singer, and you can see my drum in the background here. And so I actually sing and do those types of things, and went to powwows and went to competition powwows and sang. So I do listen to it just, like someone would sit and listen to classical music. That's just my flavor. And so she gets in the car and she says, what is this? And my daughters nonchalantly were like, well, yeah, this is our Indian music is what we call it. And she was like, this doesn't sound like India. And she was like, no, like Native American. And she was like, oh, why are you listening to this? And she's like, because we're Native American. And this modern day, I mean, just a couple of years ago. And here's what she said. She said, you can't be. All the Native Americans died. And so this is school age. So this is literally the like what, just like you were talking about, SJ, is this idea of that we are not part of the national conversation. We're not part of this, the identity of America, unfortunately. So yes, Christopher Columbus was lost at sea, and he stumbled upon the Americas. But actually, even that notion, he stumbled upon the islands in the below the Americas. He didn't even hit the Americas. So even that notion, because people think he came up in the same place as the Pilgrims came in, like that's sort of where people's minds go, or somewhere in Florida or somewhere down south. But honestly, he came and he quote unquote discovered these lands. Now, how do you discover lands that are inhabited? And so there are a lot of scholars right now that are looking into this idea of what's called the doctrine of discovery. And the doctrine of discovery is literally it started as papal bulls. It's a series of papal bulls that were written from I believe it was let me double check my source here so I don't misquote. 1451 was the first into 1493. So there were a series of documents written by the popes, by a couple different popes, and essentially the first one was to combat the Saracens or the Muslims. That's where the first papal bull was written, and essentially it gave them the freedom to go ahead and subdue, enslave, and take possession of any lands, any valuables that are essentially not of European ethnic origin. And so that was expanded to the last papal bull written in 1493 that allowed the just war with the Native Americans, or with the native peoples, not just Native Americans, because see, we think of the doctrine of discovery, and many people make the mistake that think that the doctrine of discovery is just a United States issue. No, the doctrine of discovery is actually a worldwide issue, because the United States was not the only place that these European nations were looking to expand. So they made contact with South America, Central America, North America, Canada, United States, obviously, but also places like the Philippines, South Africa, parts of India. There's also in Australia, New Zealand. These places are all affected by the doctrine of discovery, where they discovered lands that were already inhabited by original people. And so, and yes, you did make the mention, SJ, that, natives aren't native to this land, but we were in this region far before the modern day quote discovery. And there is evidence, and that's like a completely different topic, but yeah, there is evidence that, and here's something cool too that you can go and look up the Clovis, the Clovis boy found at the Anzac site. He ties together 80% of North and South America together, the original inhabitants of these lands. He was found in the Anzac site in Montana, and he has origins that actually point us back to the Bering Strait theory. So that's some, if you ever want to look that up, that's an interesting thought as well. So, but yeah, that's off topic, but,
no,
but yeah,
that's really, so about how long have and I haven't looked this up in a while. Is it a few thousand years or so that Native Americans have been? Okay.
Yeah,
so
there's, because the Anzac boy is actually dated to around 12,500 to 12,700.
Okay,
BC.
So that's going really far back.
Yeah. So it's it's a ways, So he, but yeah, he does, and they believe he was here through the first. They believe there was several migrations, obviously, and they believe there was 3. So 2, the first one is they went along the western shores, and that's how they got pushed, and they didn't cross the mountains, and it wasn't until the second push into the Americas, into North America, then they sort of got onto the more central side of the of the mountains, if you will, because there is that land barrier, and that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and you can see some of, they found some of their weapons and those types of things, and you can sort of see the migration pattern all the way down into South America. And they believe and they theorize, from what I've read, that the second actually pushed into the Central America, into the central part of Canada and the Americas, and that group didn't necessarily make it all the way down, but they were related. And then obviously the third push did not, and it was because of the glacial receding, right? Because you have your pushing, and then the waning of the glaciers as they melt, because they get farther south. So these corridors would open and allow the migration, but they theorize that on the third push there wasn't such an opening. So that's where the Inuits, who have very Asiatic features, they stayed north, because there wasn't a real passageway down into into North America at that point. And then so they sort of stayed in that upper region of and now we get the Eskimos and those, but yet we're still related, so
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah,
so
that's fascinating.
yeah.
So that brings one of the things that I think I've studied a little bit on other cultures. I haven't studied on Native Americans nearly as much as I need to, obviously. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up is, when a culture is very ancient or is very old, as the Native American culture is, a lot of times there's a lot of very deep spirituality linked in with the land in a way. For example, people feel very much attached to the land in a place like Kiribati. I studied Kiribati over in the South Pacific, and people have been there thousands of years, and they feel very attached to the land and their ancestors. And they feel, because they bury their ancestors in the land, that there's almost a spiritual presence of their ancestors. So it becomes really important to people to the land becomes something that's very spiritual to them. And I'm wondering if that relates to the Native American culture as well.
Yeah. So, and I have to put a disclaimer out. Many people, when they hear the word Native American, they automatically sort of equate us as being monolithic. There's, I think at this point, there's like over 300 federally recognized tribes, and even more so that are state recognized. And so the thing that we have to understand and realize is that these and that's just in the United States. That's not even counting the Canadian tribes or the Central American tribes and the tribes that were down in South America. So again, when we talk about each other, or we talk about humanity, most Native tribes, and one of the universals is, we always say that we are all related. And literally, when most tribes, even in the Americas and in Canada, when they open up with, whether it's a prayer or when they're done praying, most of them will acknowledge and say, like the Great Sioux Nation, they say Madakyase, or they this literally means all my relatives. And so when they close a prayer, that's how they close it. And so we literally understand and know that, yes, that we are all related in some way, shape, or form, but there are these cultural differences even amongst the tribes. So getting to, so I sort of premised that for a reason, because my context is I'm a Plains tribes. That's where I grew up, and I understand that context better than some of the other tribes, like the woodland tribes or the southern tribes, or the western Pacific tribes. They all have a different culture. Like I have no clue as to the totem poles and what their significance is to those tribes. But there's a lot of Eastern tribes that use that and have that as a cultural significance. I wouldn't know that. Some tribes do certain things, even some of the tribes out east. So I'm not trying to dance around the question, but so in the context of my understanding, and I have interacted with a lot of different tribes, but I know primarily the Plains tribes, and there is a deep connection with the land, primarily because Native Americans, most Native American tribes, did not see themselves as owners of the land. We seen ourselves as mere stewards of the land. But that did not mean that there was still a degree of pride when it came to stewarding these lands. And so that's where people get the notion of, oh, well, the Native Americans, they just left because, oh, they were the nice Indian, the noble savage, and all this type of stuff. But no, there was we seen ourselves as the stewards of these and responsible for our territories that Creator has given us. And so giving up that essentially that right essentially meant that we're giving away our responsibility. And then the foreign concept of land ownership, meaning that you individually own this land. You own the land, the topsoil, you own the minerals, the resources. And that concept was foreign to the most Native American people, because we did not see ourselves as owners, but merely it was on borrow from Creator, because most Native people were not savages. We were not savages like the Constitution. It says in the not the Constitution, excuse me, in the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence, it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So you go down 30 lines to that, and it says, talking about the king, he has excited domestic insurrections among us, and he has endeavored to bring the inhabitants of our lands or our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. That's the founding document. That's how they viewed the natives. But we were not savages. Actually, there was pushes west. There was pushing westward, and there was Jesuits, priests who seen these native people. They were pushing west, and there's documented stories of these guys were writing in their journals, and they were like, how in the world did we call these people savages when their spirituality is on par or even exceeding of most of us who would call ourselves Christian? And so these types of things, these narratives, are part of why it's important for us to understand and know these things. And yes, the land was important, but the stewardship of the land was also important. And that was the most important, because one of the things also was resources. So the resources themselves, we did not view them as assets. We viewed them as blessings. And so here's evidence of that. So most of your tribes, specifically your Plains tribes, water, for example, water was something that the European mind saw as something merely to harness, whereas the Native American mind viewed water, and this is what they called it, literally called it first medicine. Now, what does medicine do? What does medicine do? Medicine, in its actual context. Now, think of Tylenol, right? Tylenol can take your headache away. Tylenol can that ache you have in your elbow because you played, a really good round of tennis. It can help get rid of some of those things. It enhances your life. So people, when they hear a Native American say medicine, automatically their mind goes to some sort of mystical, magical thing. But we have to remember that these people, just like you said, their religion and their way of life is very ancient. So ancient usually means simple or simpler. So it doesn't automatically equate to an idea of mysticism where a lot of people want to go with a lot of these Native American things, and the people are just, a lot of people are appropriating a lot of the things that we do as well. And shout out to CMB, the ambassador. I seen him in the chat earlier. So got to acknowledge my brother as well. So you see these, a lot of these appropriations, because just the other day, do you have Five Below where you're at? It's a kind of it's almost like a dollar store, but everything's $5 and below.
Oh, no, we don't.
Yeah. So my kids love it. Actually, my wife, the whole family loves it. I mean, cause you can go and like grab a, kind of sort of a quality kind of note, but I usually go and like get some like office supplies. Cause I work from home. So like, I'll get like highlighters and stuff. So when I'm doing my Bible studies and some of my, work pens and stuff, I can get them real cheap there. And if I just need a notebook, I'll go there and grab it. So anyway, so we were at Five Below this past week, earlier this week. And I seen in this little packages for $4.50, struck in a deal, there was this wrapped up sage. Now, where does that come from? It's, sage burning and these types of things. So that's comes from our culture. And so it gets mysticized and people want to sort of cherry pick and it's sort of mixed in with this mixed bag of Eastern philosophy and all these things. And so that's where I mean, like, almost everything about Native American way of life has been so mysticized, and it's really not that way. Everything was very practical when it comes to our ways and customs and how we did things, but more specifically the land. So
yeah, well, that's really very, very educational and informative. And so I really appreciate your answer, very well thought out, and making sure that we do understand that there's variations between the tribes. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the spiritual aspect and how you became a Christian, and if that was something that you were born into, maybe your parents were Christians, or that you just discovered yourself. How did you, and then if you could maybe also explain a little bit, what was the religion or the belief system that you had, or that many Native American I can't talk. Many Midwestern Native Americans had. I think that's where you said you're from, maybe the Dakotas.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I should have explained that too. I come from the three affiliated tribes, is what we're commonly called now, or the MHA Nation. The tribes I come from, we really don't have any major claims to fame. Our biggest claim to fame, I guess, would be the Lewis and Clark expedition came through us, and they picked up Sacagawea from us, from my tribes. And but her name is not pronounced Sacagawea. It's pronounced Sagagawea. It's actually one of my native tongue words. The language that I know predominantly is called Hidatsa. And Hidatsa, Sagagawea means bird woman. And so, but I come from the three affiliated tribes: the Mandan people, the Hidatsa people, and the Arikara people. And they were all put together, by the wisdom of the United States government. And they were put there by them and through the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. And they were grouped together. So anyway, I forgot the what did I come from and how did I come to the Lord? So I came to Christ through actually some missionaries, but they did it right. So unfortunately, and here we go with some of the buzzwords, and I apologize if they trigger some folks, but there is a very manifest destiny white supremacist way of doing mission work. And unfortunately, most churches ascribe to this in America. And I call it blow in, blow up, and blow out. So they come in, they blow into this community, oftentimes unannounced to the community. They might come in because they have a sister church or something, and then they blow up and they cause a stir, and then they blow out and they're never heard from again.
Jeez.
And this has been the model of missionary work for Native Americans for a lot of years. What can you do? Can you make a disciple in 1 week? That's the question. And so when I say this idea of, white supremacy, manifest destiny, the reason why that person is going to the reservation is not because they're looking to save the soul. They're looking to make themselves feel better and that they have, quote, served the Creator, or they have served God in Christ. Is that really the model that Christ has given to us? He didn't say merely go out and preach the gospel. No, he said in Matthew 28, go and make disciples. What does it mean to make a disciple? Well, Jesus modeled that for us, right? Jesus modeled that by being with his followers, his 12 guys. He did everything with them. He cried with them. He laughed with them. He dined with them. They went on boat rides together. He did life with them. And he made these disciples. So I think our idea of mission work is very, it's very tough for us to view this, because this is just how we've done missionary work for years. And some of our children, our grandchildren, maybe some of us who are in the chat, maybe they've gone off to mission trips, and they can be a good thing, because yes, there are some things that are service driven and they're good. They might meet some needs of the community, and that does show the heart of Jesus. But therein again, what is the motivation for it? Is it to simply feel like I've checked the box? Our church sends missionaries, and we have our summer youth missionaries. And yes, I get that it teaches some things. It teaches them responsibility and all this stuff. But again, it's there for them, not for the souls of those that they're supposed to be going out to. So that's when I mean that they did it right. So they had a small group of teens, and they made them commit for a minimum of 3 years. So they would come for a week and a half, but they would have to come for 3 years consecutively. And the core group was the same. So there was a core group of the leader, his wife, who were my spiritual parents. He was my Apostle Paul, and she had gone home to be with the Lord now. My spiritual mom, Sue, who I love to death and I praise God for all the time. And my spiritual father, his name is Joe Rogers. And they're of European descent, who I love to death. But the thing is that they had a compassion for making disciples. And that's what they did right. So even though it might be faces that weren't always consistent, of course, I mean, you can't get kids to commit every single year, but essentially, so we'd have the change every few years. It'd be a new group, but we knew we were getting Joe, Sue, and then there was another brother of mine. His name is Jerry Nicholson. And they would come consistently every single year, no matter what. And so it was that core team. And then it was through their ministry that I came to Christ. And also, I do believe, because I had an anonymous donor help me go to my Bible college. I went to Bible college in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Beautiful, beautiful place to be. That's why when you went out to Jackson Hole last year, I was like, hey, do you need a place to worship? I know a great place.
Oh, that's right. You did do. Yeah. I love Jackson Hole. My gosh, it's so beautiful there.
Yes. So, but yeah, so I came to Christ through that ministry. Now my spiritual upbringing was a mixed bag. And so what I tell people is, in my experience, most Native people were already postmodern in their thinking even before postmodernism was sort of coined, because they do have a tendency, and see, that's another misnomer, is that tribal people were essentially very absorbing. There was a lot of converts even early on with the missionaries, and in first contact, there was a lot of converts, and there was a lot of Indians who were coming to Christ, and so the downside of that is then you get situations where they're very syncretistic. So we see a lot of this in the Catholic churches. So Catholic churches were very dominant in the Northern Plains. Catholics were one of the ones, not only that made first contact, but the Catholic churches were the ones that set up the missions and also the boarding schools, which I know you want to get to in a little bit. So the syncretism runs rampant usually within Native culture. And so there is no, because I mean, this is historically, this is just the way things were, because the each tribe would trade and barter things of value. So they would literally trade, like, all right, we have this 6 months of food that's going to sustain you, but I was involved in a ceremony that you guys did one time. You need to teach us how to do this ceremony. So they would literally just swap ceremonies and swap religious practices back and forth to different groups. So that wasn't uncommon in that time. So it's not a wonder that they would just go and adopt Christianity and sort of take the pieces that they liked out of it, and then sort of make this conglomerate religion, kind of like they're doing today, right? In this modern idea of spirituality, I'm non-religious, but I'm spiritual. Right. Well, that means then that, you're putting rocks around your house and crystals and, you dunking some rocks in your water so it purifies it, and you're burning sage, around your house. And so you're just doing this conglomerate of all these different religious practices, but you have no clue as to what you actually believe. So unfortunately, that is one of the drawbacks of Native people and their willingness to absorb all these different things. So myself personally, my grandmother was of that cloth. She was a traditional non-practicing Catholic, but we would also participate in many of our traditional customs. There's a lot of certain superstitial type things that were involved. Like one of them, actually, I just seen a post of one of my clans that there's a set of rules that you cannot do and things that you're not supposed to do at night. And mainly because just like here on Earth, there's night and day. So the reason why Creator made the daytime is because that's our time, because we see with light. And in those days, in the old days, the nighttime was for the other realm. So they would be out at night. So literally the spirits would be walking around and these types of things according to their beliefs. There's a lot of things and a lot of stuff you're prohibited to do at the nighttime, primarily because it can invoke and it could cause, the spirits to draw attention to yourself. And then, you might quote unquote get attacked or have some kind of spiritual warfare against yourself or whatever.
That makes complete sense. I just want to say that also is in the Bible. So it definitely, day and night, there's a distinction there. And that at night, a lot of times the evil spirit, that's the idea. They've got the night realm, and that when we do finally go to heaven, there's only going to be a day realm.
Right. And obviously, we know from Romans 1, God has shown himself through creation. Right. So of course there's going to be a lot of these overlaps, because we all came off the ark, right? We all come from one place. And so, I guess theologically you can debate that as well. It depends on, if you believe that the ark was a literal or a figurative thing, but still, the premise is there that yes, that we all come from Adam, right? So we are in essence all relatives. We are all related. We are the human race. We are one. And so there is a lot of these overlaps. And that's part of the argumentation too, that I hear, like, okay, well, if there are these overlaps, that means there's universals. So if there's universals, then that means you can't claim that Christ or Jesus or Christianity is the one true religion. Because if they all have this same, and I'm like, whoa, hold on. We need to understand like what the claim that you're making, because you might hear this even from a modern person now, like, well, you can't put your beliefs on me. Like, how dare you? But like, we're like, look, listen, there is sin. It is out there and it does exist. And I had the absolute amazing opportunity to share the gospel with one of my brothers that I sang with. Actually, it was just this week. And we've been cultivating this relationship. Him and I actually went to a ceremony with them. Oh my gosh, how dare you, Phil? You're a pagan now. But there's actually beautiful things within the culture that we could glean from. Mm-hmm. And historically, it's always been all or nothing. It's always been all. You're either all Christian or you're all native, and that's a very unfortunate thing. Because imagine if I were to say, all right, I'm going to go do some missionary work in, let's just say in Europe, let's say Spain. I'm going to go to Spain and start doing missionary work. And I start telling them that in order for you, heathen, in order for you to be ready to accept Christ, you need to speak Hidatsa, you need to dress like a Native American, you need to wear a war bonnet, and you need to wear a breechcloth, and you need to wake up at 5 a.m. because we wake up before the sun does, and this is what you need to do to be ready to receive Christ. You would think I was off my rocker if I did that. And that was already settled in Acts chapter 15. The Jerusalem Council. There was a group of people saying, look, you need to convert to this culture in order to be a follower of Christ. And they said, So now we go all these years later and say, and the Europeans are saying, look, you need to look like, act like, walk like, talk like, be like a European. Oh, and also, here's another hard truth. I'm sorry, folks, church people. Your version of church is a European style of worship. That is not how the early church worshiped. I'm sorry. They did not worship that way. The church, American church, how we do it now with a pastor in the front in a congregation listening to him, that was not how the early church did it. That was contextualized to fit the learning style of the Europeans. And then it was adopted. And then now it was considered universal. These are the things that we're talking about when we're saying some of these things have manifest destiny. And unfortunately, here's that word again, white supremacy based on it, because that has become the standard. And that is what Christianity is. It's the whitewashing of Christianity. And it has been sold as this is what Christianity is. Where's the proof? The proof is boarding schools. I actually was going to wear a shirt today. I do have a shirt that says it was the slogan from General Pratt. And his slogan for the boarding schools and how he sold it to the government was kill the Indian, save the man. That was literally the logic for boarding schools.
Yeah, let's get into the boarding school thing, because a lot of people have heard about what happened in Canada and the discovery of the graves in these Catholic boarding schools. And so in many cases, people are going and they're sort of destroying the Catholic churches up there, and maybe even some other churches. They're defacing them and doing things like that because they're so angry, and rightfully so. So some people don't really know that you're saying this is also something that was in the United States, and even your grandmother was in one of these boarding schools. So I was hoping you could maybe go into a little bit of that.
Yeah. So the boarding school system was actually designed by the United States government, and it was actually it was modeled after the military system. It was literally modeled after taking, because what do you do in the military? You take these soldiers, you isolate them from their family, and you turn them into fighting in war machines. So that's literally that you indoctrinate them and you turn them into by force and by dehumanizing them. And then essentially you build them up into what you want them to be. So that same model was taken, and these children were taken forcibly. And when I say forcibly, I mean that they were literally saying, look, if you do not allow your children to come with us, your resources will be cut off. So it'll impact your tribal numbers, the help that your tribe might get. So each family didn't want them to be responsible for, less help, whether it was financial or whether it was goods or any of the trading or any laws that would impede the progress of the tribe. And so the United States government was not afraid to wield that power. And so they would forcibly take these children. And so they were put into these schools. Most times their hair was cut because both boys and women would have long hair. And there was a traditional reason for men to have longer hair. Their hair was literally seen as their power in most tribes. It was seen as the front curtain as well. It hid there was some spiritual implications as well. It hid their spirit.
Let me quickly ask you
Sure.
ask you on the hair. Did the women's hair get cut too? I'm just curious.
There were some cases they would, but most times no. But
still the men. Okay.
Yeah, still the men, and that was dehumanizing to them. And so, that was only one piece. The second piece was the language was suppressed. So they would literally get beat. He would literally get beat, and they would literally get beat for speaking their language. So language suppression has, shout out to Nate2D2, he just arrived. So, and actually he's one of the guys who helped facilitate this conversation. So shout out to you, Nate2D2. Amazing moderator. Yeah, good guy.
Thank you. All these great people in here. Thank you, all of you in the chat.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of the dialogue guys. I appreciate you guys for interacting. Great stuff. And like I said, I'm accessible as well. So if you have more questions, shoot me up on
CJ wants Facebook. You on his channel.
Okay. So. Yeah, we can make it happen. Definitely. But yeah, so
that I didn't realize they cut their hair and they I mean, that's something that we know. It seems like now people are understanding that different religions, different faiths, different belief systems a lot of times come with these certain cultural mores. Mm-hmm. And so maybe they must not have, maybe they didn't realize, maybe they did realize that it was dehumanizing and they did it anyway.
Right. So. Well, I mean, and language suppression, that in itself, I mean, that's intentional, right? Yeah. So there's the language suppression, the cultural suppression, but not only that, there was also laws that were put into place that restricted their religious practices. So sure, you can say like, okay, well, a lot of their ways were pagan and all of this. So you can justify it however you want. But what's one way of stripping a culture of their identity is stripping them of their religious practices. So whether or not you agree, that was still an infraction on their humanization. Mm-hmm. So there was also that didn't have anything to do with the boarding schools, but that was another way that they would force assimilation. Mm-hmm. And so these were some of the things that they used to help shape them, to kill the Indian. And then they would dress them up in these foreign looking clothes. The clothes that they were giving and issued were European style, and it's crazy because, reading some of the literature that I've been reading, and I'll share. I have actually, this is my Doctrine of Discovery library right here. So I have a lot of books, and I'll share them at the end. I'll give you the titles, and I'll flash them up on the screen so you can take a look. And if you're interested in any of them, and by the way, SJ, kind of a fun thing. During at the end of the live stream, I'll post my email, or I'll just say it right now, mrphilfox@gmail.com. And I have, on behalf of Mark Charles and myself, Drops of Hope Ministries, we'll be giving away 3 of these books. And FJ, if you're interested, that will not be part of the 3.
I am.
Okay, so we'll be giving away 3 of these at the end of the live stream. So all you have to do is just email me at Mr. Phil Fox. The first 3 will get a free copy of Unsettling Truths. It goes through the Doctrine of Discovery, and it actually has some very comprehensive steps forward. So I do. This is one of the most. This is one of the most progressive books as far as solutions is concerned, because we hear a lot of this stuff like white fragility and all that kind of stuff, but Mark Charles and Soong Cheng Ra, they actually don't subscribe to white fragility. So there's a very interesting at the end of the book, a couple chapters about how they propose doing steps forward and how we enter into lament. And
I want to get into that because it reminds me of something. Now, I live in Florida, and in Florida, and I happen to go to Florida State University, which is the Seminoles, and the Seminole tribe is very well respected and well known throughout Florida. And in fact, to be a member of the Seminole tribe is a pretty good deal in some financial ways, because they're benefiting from these casinos. The government's allowed the Seminoles to run these casinos well before it allowed anybody else. And the Seminole casinos are incredibly profitable. And so as a Seminole person, I believe you get around $84,000 per year from the Seminole casinos, which is that's a good financial deal. But I've looked up other tribes, because I said my husband's great grandmother is from the Creek Indians. And I looked up, hi, I'm a Creek. Is there a benefit to being, I was just wondering if this is this something that you said there's 300 tribes. So are others benefiting in some ways from casinos or other sorts of things? And is there more that we can do besides that, or is that enough? Is it enough for us to say, let the Seminoles operate these casinos and they can financially benefit from that?
Yeah. So, those are some ways that the government has tried to, reconcile some of these things. So yes, there is added benefits. Yes, I pay taxes. There's all these, sometimes you'll get these derogatory things. And they'll say, well, you don't pay taxes, or you don't have to pay for water, or you don't have to pay for schooling and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, where did you get that notion? Like, I pay taxes. I pay, yes, some on the reservation, you don't pay if you're, some reservations are protected and you don't pay federal income tax or state income tax. You pay federal only. And so there are some small benefits, and there are some a lot of grants and stuff for Native American students to go out there. So yes, there are some things that are there that are to help supplement Native people to help succeed. So it's not just like this whole thing is, there has been some effort to try and provide opportunities, but unfortunately those things are buried. Going to the program office to try to get one of the applications for one of these things is ridiculous. So sure, you could say there's the opportunity, but would you sit for 8 hours and literally I've sat for 8 hours to go to a doctor's appointment for Indian Health. That's free healthcare, Phil. Okay, but would you sit for 8 hours?
Oh yeah, 8 hours. Wow.
Yeah, take an entire day off and make no money or have to take leave. So most people take leave because they can't afford to be without that money for 8 hours. And there's been instances where I literally sat for 2 days. Oh, sorry, we're closing. We couldn't get to you today, so you got to just come back tomorrow.
Wow.
And I had an appointment. So these are some of the things that we face, and people think, oh well, you just get free healthcare, you get free this, you get free that. Okay, so, yeah, I mean, it's not that simple, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the steps in the book you mentioned? You said there are some ways forward. What, because I think one of the things that I think is really important that you're doing today that I think that people need to know is we need to understand our history as far as all perspectives from all of the people who've been occupying this part of the world. And so I think that that's so important. But I think the fact that you're getting out there and sharing that with people is super important. Maybe some history books need to be rewritten. Maybe some areas needed to be, if not, at least add supplemental information if you're a history teacher. So I'm just thinking those are a couple things, but what else can, and in some ways the government's addressed some financial issues, but obviously not the best healthcare, it doesn't sound like, but there could be, what else, is there a cultural thing that needs to be done? Or is there just something else? Like, is there other things?
Well, and here's the thing too, is, it's, this is always a difficult question because, just like I can't remember if you said it before or after we went live. We're not going to change the world in one live stream, and we're not going to change the world with one book. We're not going to change the world with one protest or with one march or with one, but there is some progression. And the thing is I think America needs to be honest about the sins of the past. We need to stop this over individualism of America, and especially American Christianity. I didn't do that. That wasn't mine. But that wasn't my. I had no slaves myself. We get it. We understand that. But the problem is that there has been damage that has been done that is passed down generationally. There are lack of opportunities. There's some reservations. Actually, there is a reservation that is the poorest community in the United States. It's in South Dakota.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
that's not good.
And yeah, it's not good. But historically,
so the lacking. See, I want to just build off what you said. You said something really important. You said lack of opportunities, because a lot of times people frame these arguments and they'll say equality of outcomes. But I think what you're saying, no, we want equal opportunities. And that's the thing that everybody should be able to get on board with. It's not, that's where if there's inequities, if you find that the opportunities aren't there, that's key. So you're saying, are there, what sort of opportunities do you feel that maybe are inhibiting the people in South Dakota in that one tribe that you mentioned?
Well, so, I mean, like, it's not even in South Dakota. Like, if I went back home to my home tribe and I'm financially stable, I could not get a home loan because I live on the because I would live on the reservation. I don't live on the reservation now. But if I lived on the reservation, I would not be able to secure a home loan. Why? Because it's too risky.
Yeah.
So that's how they justify it. It's too risky to loan to those people on the reservation. Or they say, oh, because the bureaucracy is so high. There's banks on the reservation who are operating on the reservation. They're white owned. They will not mortgage to Native people. So
wait, can you get a home loan where you are now?
Yes, absolutely. But I couldn't get it on the reservation.
A home loan there, it doesn't. Yeah, see, that is very bad. It shows that if you can get a home loan where you are, this doesn't have anything to do with your credit history or anything like that. This is purely based on the reservation, which that sounds like something that definitely is systemic and needs to be fixed.
Right. Precisely. And speak, I mean, there's other things, SJ, too. And this is something that I've told before. This CMB has heard this before. And I remember his jaw being on the floor. He's in the live chat. But I just want to point out, like, some people say, oh, because you mentioned the word systemic, and people are very leery of that word. But here's some evidence of that. Within the United States government, there's all these different branches of government, right? There's the Department of Defense, there's the Department of Justice, there's all of these legislative branches and these management branches of the United States government, and they all serve a specific purpose. So within the United States government, there's this branch called the Department of Interior. What is the Department of Interior? The Department of Interior is the land, animal, and endangered species branch of the government. Property, right? What sits within the Department of Interior? The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education, sits in the land management, asset management. National parks are in there. The endangered species are in there, and so are the Native Americans. So what kind of psyche? And again, going back to the original documents, it's not a wonder we were placed in there. So how is that for the psychological aspect of us knowing? And we're not stupid. We understand and know that we're sitting in there with these animals. And here's the last straw, SJ. There has been a push within the last let's say 10 years for this group of women who are not counted when they go missing or when they're murdered. There's
Really?
only one.
That's horrible.
There's only one demographic in the United States and Canada, and that's Indigenous women. There is no records. There are no records whatsoever of how many. They're not part of the national statistics. They're just not.
That is crazy.
You can go and look. So yeah, so you can go. Actually, there's been a movement, and I have some friends who are part of the MMIW movement, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women movement.
Wow. I had no idea about that. That's horrible.
And so tell me what's not systemic about that. Because here again, we have the numbers of how many bald eagles are left. We have the numbers of how many black or grizzly bears there are in the United States. We understand all these endangered species, but these human beings weren't bothered to be counted. Now you can say, "Oh, well, I mean, it's this or it's that or it's tribal." It's no. Let's be done with the excuses. Let's really take a look at these. Yeah, go ahead, SJ.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what you're saying here with this respect to the bald eagles, because it reminds me of some other group that also is being treated in a horrific way. And that's the 60 million babies who've been aborted since 1973. Yeah. And the bald eagle and the turtle have more rights than an unborn child in the United States, which is pretty darn disgusting. I mean, if you kill a bald eagle egg or a turtle egg, you can be thrown in the clink and be charged a huge fine. But if you abort a baby, even some cases all the way up to the third trimester in these late abortions in some cases, or even some people are talking about, what about if you don't want to have the baby after you have the baby, can you just commit infanticide? I mean, we've got some really sick people out there. Yeah. And so what can we do? I mean, what should the government do now to make sure we start addressing these Indigenous women?
Yeah, so there actually has been some laws that have been passed. There was I forget her name, Sylvia Littlewind, I believe her name was. So she was a young lady who disappeared in Fargo, North Dakota, and so she actually made national headlines. And they did this big search, and they found it was the ex-boyfriend and his mother who had taken her newborn baby, and they were trying to get rid of her. And so it was because of her that it wasn't, I can't remember if it was called the Savannah Act or something like that. But anyway, she was a catalyst, if not the act was based upon her, but she was a catalyst to help get this whole thing pushed. And this has touched me. I mean, this MMIW thing has touched me. There's a good friend of mine, actually a brother, who I used to sing with, or we're still part of the same group, but we haven't sang together in almost 10 years, but we're still very much brothers, and I love him to death. But his sister went missing. I believe it was in like a November or an October. I think it was of either 17 or 18. And they did a search, the FBI, and this is, again, getting back to some of the systemic stuff. Like, reservations were meant to oppress. They were literally put out in the middle of nowhere for a purpose. They're away from any city centers, any populous areas. There's not many reservations actually exist near any, especially out west. They're desolate places. They were undesired lands and all those types of things. So that causes issues then with the FBI, because everything that happens that's a high crime, then it's turned over to the FBI. And so something as crazy as anything over $250 is considered grand theft. So what FBI agent's going to come looking for $300? Yes. So there is sort of this, this half speed mentality when it comes to looking for some of these things. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just ask on that. So you're saying, I just want to make sure I get this clear. So you're saying the FBI is essentially the police force in the reservations? They don't have a police force?
No. Yeah, there are local police forces, and some of them are cross-deputized for some. So think of it this way. So some of your common stuff like disorderly conduct, or there might be some sort of, so anything considered high crime, it's not done by and like I said, grand theft, the minimum for grand theft is only like $250. Maybe it might be a little bit higher, but it's around that realm, maybe like $500. So what FBI agent is really going to come out to come look for like $500 of missing money?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That's an absolute misuse of, but it's because of some of the sovereignty issues, tribal sovereignty issues, and also the bureaucracy that the United States government is trying as hard as they can to keep that thumb on the laws of the native people. So that's where some of these things like murder, they're taken over by these FBI agents that don't want to be there. They do not want to be there, and you can tell because they do their investigations half speed, and they're there for 10 days, and then it's like, oh well, we couldn't find them. We looked, so we're they're just missing.
Why don't because I believe don't police departments in other areas would do the investigations for murder? So why is it farmed out to the FBI?
Because of the bureaucracy. Because of the bureaucracy, and because of the how the laws are structured.
Okay. That sounds like a fault. So I get very touchy with the word systemic racism too, because I feel like, we have to dig into it. We want to make sure we get all the facts out there. And I have looked into some of the issues. There's issues with in other cultural groups, but there's issues with as far as males and females getting married, having kids, doing that kind of thing. A lot of times, if you're not in the traditional family units, you might end up being in an impoverished, vicious cycle because you've got one parent trying to raise the family. And so I've looked into that across cultures, and some of that can be attributed actually going back to FDR and some of these social welfare programs. But the thing that you're bringing up with the American Native Americans is you brought up a lot of different issues that still are out there that need to be reconciled. Like, for example, what you mentioned with the Department of the Interior, where I had no idea that this was something that was really an offensive thing when you say that they're put in there, there's animals being protected, and then suddenly they have the Native Americans also being oversight to the Native Americans. How are they putting these two together? And then that brings us all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, where you cited 30 lines down referring to Native Americans as less than human in some way.
Yeah, precisely. And that's why, yes, I'm very careful as well, but when you see something, we need to understand it, and we need to look at it for what it is. Because, the narrative has been very slick. So they call it expansion, right? Because what we don't understand is, and there's some statistics out there that actually literally show Mark Charles in one of his presentations. It's very, very, very triggering for a lot of folks, but he has shown that through the census numbers that are given, and you can look this up, you can go to census.org, and you can look at Native American population from I think it's 1850 to 1860. Shows Abraham Lincoln is literally more genocidal than Nazi Germany. He has a 41% genocide rate as opposed to Nazi Germany's, I think it's 36 or 38.
Jeez, that's terrible.
So Abraham Lincoln is quote unquote the great emancipator, right? The great the great hope, and he provided all these things, but yet while he was writing these great things, I also have, just like I have this book, I have some of his writings. I actually have it here, but so the Gettysburg Address and other writings, I just need to understand, and I'm trying to get into his mind, but also, so while he was doing these things and being tagged as the great emancipator, he also set up the I just forgot what it's called, homesteading, the Homestead Act. And the Homestead Act displaced hundreds of thousands of Native American people. And so they called that expansion, but what is that really? That's called ethnic cleansing. And even while he was doing these things, he was literally setting up manifest destiny, because he was bringing the technology to the savages, right? He was bringing all of these things because why? Because they were trying to put the railroad in. So one of the things also that he has credit for is that Abraham Lincoln is responsible for the largest mass execution on American soil.
Jeez. Who knew that?
Of the Dakota 38. So there was a group of warriors who yes, I'm not trying to get into, so the I'm not sure how you say his name, the cynic log. He just talked about that in the live
CJ.
chat. Yeah, CJ.
CJ says Lincoln killed 38 Native leaders in a single day in the most prolific mass execution in American history.
And you know where that was? That was in Mankato, Minnesota. And so he, because, CJ, shout out to you, CJ, for that. So yes, there was the Great Dakota War, and it lasted for around 30, I think it was like 37 days or 36 days. And yes, there was some inexcusable things done by the Native people, but it was in response to the lack of resources, or actually it wasn't even the lack, it was the broken promise of the United States government and the racism of the people that were there, because the people that were in the area were seeing the tribe starting to starve, and they said, let them starve. There's actually documented quotes saying, let them eat grass.
Oh, that's horrible.
And so it was based upon the racism, the frustration, and the resources that were promised to them. So imagine, SJ, if my tribe just came in and said, all right, SJ, your entire neighborhood, we're taking this over. But here's what we'll do for you. We're going to do you a favor, SJ, and we'll give you, I don't know what your house is worth, but we'll give you 1/10 of that. And then, but we're going to do you a favor. We have land over here. It's great land. We promised everybody in this area, you're all going to get the same thing. So don't worry. You're all going to be treated fairly. But we're taking it. So you can either sign or we'll just take it. And then on top of that, oh, by the way, you don't have to worry because the 10% of what you're going to get, you're not even going to have to dip into that. SJ, this is going to be, this is all going to be taken care of because we'll take care of your room and board too. So we'll give you the resources that you need to rebuild, and we'll feed you. And then when it comes down to it, so imagine, first of all, you're frustrated with that. And then now all of a sudden you're upset and mad and you're going to want to fight, right? But then you see other people moving into your home that you've built, that you've stewarded, that you've used your own resources to remodel, to get up to date. And then now my tribe comes in and says, oh yeah, by the way, that 10%, we can only give you 1% of your home value. Sorry about that. And we've had, because your own people, MJ or SJ, I'm sorry, because of your own people, you've caused the delay in the trains. So all of that food, I'm sorry, it rotted on the way. So
Jeez.
I'm sorry you can't. And then
Mess.
but the people that moved into your house were like, let them eat grass. Who cares? They're all right. Just leave them alone. And so imagine the frustration. And so, yes, they retaliated. Absolutely. Was it justified? And yes, they killed women and children. Yes, unfortunately, yes, they did, but it was out of retaliation. So what they did is there was like 300 warriors, and some of them went up into Canada. The United States government got cross-deputized by the Canadian authorities, and they rounded them up. But Abraham Lincoln had a decision. So either go with the people of the Minnesota land that were in the land of Minnesota, or let some of these off, because he didn't want a genocide on his hands. So there was some back and forth negotiations, and then that's how they settled on 39 warriors, but only 38 of them were hung in the largest mass execution to date on United States soil. So wow. you can say yes, the Native Americans, but they slaughtered all them poor people. Okay, that's right, sure. But you can also say, oh, the Aztecs were they were absolutely nothing but savages who killed. So that justifies the Spanish coming in and absolutely slaughtering them. That is what is socially acceptable. That's bringing society.
Yeah. That's the narrative that actually you're hitting on that with Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas. You definitely have people saying, oh, they used to do these sacrifices where they might carve the heart out of a child. And they definitely try to make them out to be as savagey as possible to try to justify it. And it is like you said, we do have a racist history. There is no doubt that the United States has a racist history. And we have started to clean it up in a lot of ways, right. But we still have room to go. So I always talk about Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says you cannot discriminate based on race, religion, color, national origin, or gender. And the reason I bring that up is because in 1964, and then some laws after that, the redlining was also made illegal and all of this other kind of stuff. But it sounds to me that the population of Native Americans isn't one that we see in the mainstream media. It's not something we see in inside media. We just don't see much coming out from the Native population. And so the reason I'm bringing that up is because lots of other groups here in the United States are drawing attention to themselves, but I don't think the Native Americans have a very strong voice. It's almost like we need someone who's a very loud, maybe you, need to go out and be that voice for the Native Americans and educate people. We need people to know our history.
Absolutely. And that's why, I bring up Mark Charles a lot, because Mark actually ran for president in 2020. He got on the ballot, I think, on 6 states, and he is looking at doing some of this stuff. So, I mean, I don't agree with everything, theologically. He is a Christian, and that's a huge blessing within itself as well. But his heart and how we need to look at these things, because here's the thing. I know a lot of this stuff, and even in Mark's book, I mean, it's beautifully titled Unsettling Truth, because I know that a lot of this stuff is very unsettling. I know it's very difficult, My grandmother taught me when I was growing up. And yes, there was a lot of poison from the boarding schools and stuff like that. So I had to take it with a grain of salt. But the thing is that my grandmother always taught me, and my elders, most of my elders would teach me that, listen, you don't have to hate the white man. They're just ignorant. So really what we need to do is pray for them, and we pity them. So that was literally the mind frame. So there are a lot of Native people who are still upset. And that's where I talked about the generational thing. And so one of the really astounding things in Mark's book, in Mark and Sung Chang's book, is that they cite Rachel McNair did a study on this idea of perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. It's called PITS. And this idea of PITS is the same. It's the same thing. So we have PTSD, which is an individual traumatic stress, right? Mm-hmm. So you go from PTSD to generational PTSD, which is called historical trauma. Mm-hmm. So historical trauma is passed down from generation to generation to generation. So that's how you get these communities of people who have gone through things, and now generations later, you have folks, for lack of better terms, are just pissed off. And so it's because that trauma has been passed down through generations. So what Mark and Sung Chang Ra, what they propose in the book is that there is a generational PITS, the perpetrator-induced traumatic stress. And so they say we need to forget white fragility, throw it out the window, because what does white fragility do? White fragility, it gives the narrative and it gives the control back to the Euro-ethnic culture, because they get to say, oh, I'm so sorry for what I've done. And now they become the victim. And then they get to fulfill themselves, and then nothing changes. Or you get mad because I didn't do nothing. I didn't earn no slaves. I didn't do any of that kind of stuff. And so that there again is another sign, anger, right? And so that takes the narrative. And again, the Euro-ethnic folks have the control. So what they propose is that we both come together as traumatized people. And so it's very hard because that message doesn't necessarily fit well with people who are already traumatized, because PITS does not promote the fact that these people have been traumatized the same way that the people who have been oppressed have been traumatized. But there is some degree of shame and guilt and these things, because there are people who knew it was wrong, and then you have to sometimes justify why you're doing things. You have to answer some of these tough questions for yourself and for your own conscience. So that's what they theorize, is that there's a generational PITS model that fits both societies and levels the playing field, and we can all come to the table together as traumatized people. So it sounded like you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Well, no, I do, because I was thinking about, I'm thinking about one group of, my son took a class in high school, his elective class. He was assigned to this class, and he was actually quite glad he took it, but it was on the Holocaust. And the Holocaust is, even though the high schools don't do a very good job on teaching us on communism, I think their job on communism is a joke. They really need to let us know exactly what happened in the Soviet Union and what's happened under Mao Zedong in China, because it's egregious. 120 million people, but they don't do a good job with that, but they do a very good job with the Holocaust. And I think one of the reasons for that is the fact that a lot of Jewish people are very heavily involved in government and media and other places where they can be these strong voices. And so, and I think that's been a very wise move. And I've talked to Jewish people, and they've told me that was an intentional move on many of their parts, because they don't want to see this history repeated ever again. And so I was just thinking, again, having that voice, that a couple of people or even more, maybe encouraging your peers, your Native American peers, say, let's get involved. Let's get into the news and the media and these other kind of places. And that could be a nice way to educate people and open our minds.
Yeah, precisely. And that's why that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now is first of all to, I love educating just people in general. And moreover, what I want to do, and I have the absolute joy of being a partner with Mark Charles in his mission. So I'm actually a moderator on his YouTube channel, and him and I go through strategy all the time. And so I purposefully, every time he opens up for Q&A, I purposefully ask this question, and I say, Mark, how do we keep from using these truths as simply quivers in our or arrows in our quiver, excuse me, to just shoot truth darts at people and use this as weaponry to further our hate towards the quote white man? How do we keep ourselves from just essentially using this as a weapon and weaponizing it? So I ask him that question all the time. And so that's why I do what I do, is to try and educate both, because I have to do both sides, because my native people, they have not heard it or seen it articulated in this manner before. And they have not seen, and most of them are like, and you can see the light bulb like flick on, and it's at 100 million lumens. And so you have to sort of teach them to harness that. And so that's why I always premise everything that I say, like, look, this is not because I hate one people group. And moreover, because this is how I was taught by my elders, was not to just simply use things to hurt people. Because, and also, what did Jesus say, right? What's the golden rule? So I'm trying to treat you how I would like to be treated. So yes, there are some hard truths that are within the narrative of this country, but we have to be honest with how we look at it and honest with the narrative as well. And that goes for both sides. That's the Native Americans, because we also have to remember that it wasn't just Pocahontas in a canoe on some lazy river. There was war and there was things, but yes, and you can say whatever. Most people would say, well, that's because they were fighting for survival. Okay. But there was horse stealing. There was thievery. Actually, even the story that I told you about Sacagawea, I actually looked into the history, and she was around 12 to 14 years old at the time that she was captured, literally marched over 600 miles. And so I'm like, we need to be honest with our history too. And that doesn't come off very, very friendly when I'm telling about these things, and my own people hear this stuff, because they're like, well, how dare you say that about, our beloved Sacagawea, but no, let's talk about it. Let's be honest, because there are interviews of her talking to people about her experience when she was with the Hidatsa, because she was not a traditional Hidatsa. She was a Shoshone. So, and she was captured. And there was a long debate about going back and forth. Even some people in my own family who were trying to correct the narrative, but it was essentially whitewashed for our benefit, for the Hidatsa narrative to fit. So we need to be honest on both sides, so these are the challenges, and these are the things that we need to, and my mission and my goal is to educate both sides and not to weaponize these great truths that for many are not going to sit well, because it's completely contrary to how we think. And just like you said earlier, SJ, to how we're taught, because there is a lot of narrative, especially now in social media and in politics, that they're trying to rewrite history, and it's anti-American and all this kind of stuff. But we're like, hold on, let's really talk about the realities of the things that happen. Let's really look at the histories, and praise God that there are people that are doing that, so that way we can really be level at the foot of the cross.
And that brings me just to my last question. I have, and if you guys have a question, I did see Susan wants to ask you about your views on immigration, or unfettered immigration, she called it. So I do have that. But I wanted to say something that I think kind of speaks to bringing this all back to Jesus. And the thing about Jesus is he was completely mistreated unfairly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is the exemplar of the worst possible treatment for the best possible person on this planet. He was spat upon, he was made fun of, he was hung on a cross in a very humiliating way, completely unfair. And the thing that I think is important just to remember is we don't want, when you do expose someone's past, or you go into it and you say, like, if I went maybe back into my past and I realized certain things in my life, or maybe even certain things in my parents' lives or people before that, is you don't want to come out of this as a victim. You want to come out of this as a hero and a person who's a voice of courage and strength. And I think that's what our moral exemplar has done for us. Mm-hmm. Is even though he was mistreated in these horrible ways, he came out very strong, and he still forgave these people. And right. as hard as that can be, he still did it. And so, but on the other side, if people don't even realize the story, which is what you shared a lot of today, when people don't even realize the story and all the stuff behind the Trail of Tears and all of these horrific things that have occurred and are still going on, like you're mentioning, I think that they don't know, they don't even realize that there's an issue out there. And I think that that's super important that you bring that to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is the ultimate truth. This, just like how I started, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And we need to remember that he is the star of the show. And unfortunately, the church they have this blemish, but that doesn't mean there can't be reconciliation and, or what we would call conciliation, because reconciliation literally means that there was a common past that we both strived, or we both thrived, excuse me. Mm-hmm. But in this country, there hasn't been a place where we both have had unity. And that's the troubling part. Mm-hmm. So yes, we need to keep our eyes fixed upon the cross, but that also means being honest about these things. So simply sweeping them under the rug, that's not Christ-like, because that's what and unfortunately that's how the church has chosen to handle a lot of different things: segregation,
so true,
LGBTQ issues. This just, you spoke about it earlier, the abortion issue. Most churches don't want to talk about that stuff. And these are it's not the exact context of the quote, but I can't remember the guy who said it, but he basically said, like, false doctrine is the unpaid bills of the church. Well, all of these issues, racial issues, all of these things are the unpaid bills of the church, because the church does not feel like they need to get engaged. These types of things are things that we need to attack directly. We need to form an apologetics for it. And that's the thing is I've criticized the church for lazy apologetics. This channel is called Psalm 23 Apologetics. So if there was an actual apologetic approach, if they took the Acts 17 approach and used the culture to show them Christ and not keep Europeanism as the standard, we wouldn't be in this pickle. But instead, they've chose to sell out, because the doctrine of discovery actually has roots that are a lot earlier than these papal bulls from the 15th, 16th century.
Yeah, I want to build on what you're just saying with the church, because I'm a person who grew up in the Catholic Church, and I was very disillusioned with the church in my 20s and decided that I was going to walk away. And I was floundering around as a very weak Christian for years after that, kind of fell into progressive in little ways and came back, but not to the Catholic Church. But the reason why I still get upset with the Catholic Church is I still feel that they're not addressing all of the issues, like the altar boys issues. And now we're finding out about these homes, even here in Canada. And we're finding out that they did all this stuff in the boarding homes. That's not in the public narrative. Nobody seems to know this stuff. And the Catholics, why isn't the Pope out there talking to people in Canada, for example, where they just unearthed in 2 different places, just unearthed hundreds of little babies' bodies, little kids' bodies.
Right.
And so I think that the church really needs to clean up its act. And unfortunately, we've seen these flaws with the church going back hundreds of years. I mean, they had a point in the Middle Ages where you could buy indulgences. That's why Martin Luther was so mad at the church. You could say, oh, I'm going to sin, so I will simply go over to the church and I will purchase an indulgence, maybe pay whatever the money was, and then I go and I do my sin. and I could even go buy sin redemption for my family members, even the ones who passed away. I could go pay the church these indulgences. It was totally ridiculous the way they were operating.
It was just wealth grab. You know, it just came down to a wealth grab, and unfortunately, but I mean, it's even before that. I mean, imagine the church becoming the state religion, and now the theologians have to start talking to that. Now the church is in bed with government. Oh my goodness! Now we have to find out what is just war theory. That's a whole nother topic. But that's where this stuff comes from. This stuff comes from the church being flooded with unbelievers, because the early church was absolutely persecuted. Roman candles was a thing. You know, these Christians on the streets being burned, you know, for sport, because they were sold out, not to Caesar, but because they were sold out to Christ the King, and that was treason. And so now all of a sudden, the church is the Christianity is the state religion. Now it's flooded with unbelievers. Now the theologians have to figure out, how do we manage this? So they start writing things like just war theory. You know, they start writing these ideas that are contrary to the gospel, to the scriptures, to Christ's words himself. How do you move from Christ saying, turn the other cheek, forgive 70 times 70. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. But we're placing war medals on a bomb, writing scripture verses and dropping them on innocent people. Where do we get from that to that? So go ahead.
Let's put some numbers on that, because I'm thinking about, let's just so the audience knows. So we're going back to the very first few hundred years of Christianity. So until the year 313, when Constantine gave Christians legal permission to worship, until that time, they were sporadically and very heavily persecuted under emperors like Nero and Diocletian, and some really horrific ones. And to be a Christian was very difficult. And the historians have told me that I've seen in these books that between 5 and 6 million people were worshiping Christianity, worshiping Jesus, when at the time of Constantine legalizing it. And then within 100 years or so, between 50 and 60 million Christians were about. But what you're saying is in those centuries, when you have people like Aquinas and Augustine going in the centuries following, you've got suddenly them saying, we're going to legitimize this idea of going to war in Christ's name. And Christ said, like you said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. So I just wanted to throw that in there, because we do have an ugly history starting around probably following Constantine, rather sadly. And you're saying that maybe some of these 50 to 60 million people who claim to be Christians, maybe they're really wolves in sheep's clothing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just like, you know, not everyone who is a Jew is a Jew. You know, not every person, and Christ even said it himself, right? Not everyone who calls me Lord, who calls out Lord, Lord, you know, I'm gonna turn you away. You know, so there's evidence of that, and unfortunately, that is. That's why I don't see some of these things that are, oh my goodness, the church is being persecuted and all these things. So I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing, because it helps purify the church. It helps, you know, if it's not cool to be Christian anymore, then only those true believers are going to continue on. The rest are going to fall to the wayside. So it's not a total bad thing, you know, that these things are happening. Because, and again, like, you know, yes, all of these things are very difficult to comprehend and understand, but it's in God and the way that he chose to do these things, calling out the people that are of Native American heritage, if they can get over that and these things, and I'm not saying like, oh, it's perfectly justified because it was God's sovereign will to do these things, but still, even if someone can come to Christ through those things, through this understanding, then it will help them to understand and know that they are a true believer, and it's not just easy believism. Because I don't preach, because I was talking again with I talk all the time with some of my Native brothers and sisters, and that's one of the things they love to throw in my face as well. What you're talking about, they don't use the term, but what they're getting at is that you're talking about, Phil, is you're talking about easy believism, but that's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sacrifice of culture. There are things within my culture that I feel like I cannot celebrate. There are certain things within my culture that I cannot participate in. Does that make me any less Native American? No. Does that make me, so, but again, like, they believe I'm selling out to the white man because they have this very skewed view of what it means to be a Christian and what it means to be a Native. And there is no reconciliation in their eyes.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me a little bit of the Black Hebrew Israelites and kind of the idea that I mean, I just see, I worry about that kind of stuff when people, and even when people do these portraits of Jesus and they paint Jesus and Mother Mary as being extremely white, and then you look at, well, wait a second, he came from the Middle East,
right.
and I see a lot of Middle Easterners in my school. We get a lot of Middle Easterners, and most of them have pretty dark skin. So,
right.
I mean, it's kind of like, what? It actually, Jesus came from, people don't sometimes realize Jesus probably wasn't this blonde-haired, blue-eyed. It was like,
right.
That's the image that's out there.
That's a great point. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, Phil, I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on the channel. I did want to still get to Susan's question, though, because she asked, and I don't think we have too much time left, but she had asked you about immigration and what's your views on maybe the wall or that sort of thing. And so I'm curious to.
You know what? I don't, I think that we as a quote Christian nation, we should be, I mean, look at the Old Testament model. You weren't supposed to cut your entire field. Why? Because of the foreigner that was come so they can eat. Like, we're supposed to be welcoming. We're supposed to be a community. We're supposed to be an example to the world of what it looks like, because in the scriptures, in Revelation, they've seen a great multitude of many tribes, tongues, and nations. So we should be exemplars of that. We should look like that. And yes, you can argue, well, they're going to bring their pagan views, and they're going to bring their, okay, well, that just means that Christianity is going to look a little bit different, because the world is going to be the world. And I also seen that somebody asked, what's my views on homosexuality and abortion issues. So along with those things, like, I am, when it comes to all of these social issues, I don't think that it's our job to try to condemn. I do disagree that it is, and I do agree that it's unbiblical to be a homosexual. Absolutely. But does that mean that I have to go out and march and be anti-gay everything? No, my job is to go alongside people and to show them this is what it means to be a follower of Christ. Because what we do in this country is we overemphasize one sin over the other, because the church is so heavy right now on abortion and homosexuality. Well, what about sex before marriage? I don't see churches railing against that.
That's
what
true.
what about the discrimination issues that are happening in this country? I don't see the church railing against that. Actually, I see the church opposing those types of views. It's an entire group of people. It's an entire group of people who are saying that they're being discriminated against. How in the world do you get that kind of unity out of any people. But all of a sudden now they're lying or they're misrepresenting somehow. So I know that some of these views are touchy, but there and again, and again, this isn't just an economic thing. People cite economic stuff all the time. We shouldn't be worried about that. We shouldn't be worried about the dollars in our pocket. We're not taking that with us. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against saving and creating a good atmosphere for your upbringing of your children and providing stability for your family. Absolutely. But the thing is if you have $500,000 in the bank or $1 million in the bank, but you are not doing life with people and you're only giving the minimum to people, I think that you're committing sin because you're hoarding these riches, but yet you're only giving a little. Mm-hmm. And that's wrong. Or just going down and saying, justifying the way you live life and saying, oh, well, I go down to the food pantry once a month and hand out food or box food or whatever. Like, again, please don't get my words as saying like, oh, he's, anti all of this stuff. No, I'm not. I'm saying we need to do more. And my money is where my mouth is. I don't just give books out on live streams. There are people who are in need in my community. I get, and again, this isn't me trying to be braggadocious or anything, but I get inboxes all the time from people who need help, whether financially, spiritually, and I give all of that away and making sure that my family is taken care of. So those are my views. As far as abortion, absolutely, it's wrong. Do I believe there should be some stipulation for medical? I do believe that. There needs to be some justified medical reason. Why? Because my wife had to abort one of her children because her organs were shutting down. And she had a child here already breathing, unfortunately. So that wasn't an abortion. That was actually a rescue mission. So they had to decide it was either the unborn child or the life of my wife. And then she would have to leave behind a child. So, wow. So those, yeah. So go ahead, SJ.
No, I like, I think your opinions are balanced and fair. And I could go behind, some of the views that I have. I think a lot of times if we go back to the one president who actually had something like 94% of, I think it was 94% of the electoral votes or something, which is Ronald Reagan. One of the things he did that people might not remember is that he paved the way to open the doors to give people who are undocumented opportunities for citizenship. And I think that I look at the 12 million people they estimate who are undocumented today, and I would like to see them get a path to citizenship. And I think the documentaries that I've seen on those people, there's another group that's marginalized and often ignored, unfortunately. They could use a voice too.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
So good. Well, Phil, where can people reach you? I know I just found you on Twitter. I've got a protected account right now on Twitter, and I talk about Gideon having this little teeny account of 300, but God knew that Gideon was able to beat a crowd of hundreds of thousands. And so I want to know where can we find you? I know you're on Twitter at Mr. Phil Fox because I just found you.
I'm on all the socials. All your socials, Mr. Phil Fox, MrPhilFox, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. I have a Twitch account, but I'm not on there as much. But yeah, any of your socials, definitely look me up. I don't have any kind of, I don't know what they're called, the celebrity account types. So I have just a regular like Facebook account where you can friend request me and send me a chat or whatever, and I usually respond. And if I don't know who you are, I'll respond kind of reluctantly, generally. But like I said, I'm very accessible. I don't, I'm just a guy. I'm just a a guy who's out here trying to do ministry. I'm nothing special. I don't have any crazy, knowledge about any one type of thing. I'm just, I'm a jack of all trades, if you say, how they say it. But yeah, so, I mean, I love Christ and love talking about these things. And I would encourage you to reach out, if you have any more questions or, any concerns or anything you disagree with, and we can talk about it, because I'm open, definitely open. So.
Yeah. And I found you. Yeah. You're also on. You guys make sure, if you're in this chat right now, you better go over to his channel and subscribe, because we all could use more subscribers, and it's always good to get the word out. And he is doing a good thing. He's got a great voice here for the Native American community, and he's doing a great job. So I look at my husband is one distant Native American. So his great grandmother was a full-blooded Creek, I think I mentioned before. And so but he identifies mainly as more like from the European side of our family. So it's interesting to look at this kind of thing and realize that in some cases, a lot of us might even personally identify, even though, might be able to relate, and especially when we feel on the human level that we're all made in the image of God. We're all part of the same, came off the ark, as you said. And so it's all very important. So you've got a great voice, Phil. that Nate is saying, Nate would like to have you back on my channel. I would love to have you back on my channel sometime if you're willing.
Oh yeah.
And you have a very good voice, so I can see why you'd be good at singing.
I always do. Actually, later on this evening, I'll be on BK Apologist channel, doing Bodega Bible Talk. He has a channel where he does a lot of different apologetics, and so one of his staples is he does Bodega Bible Talk every Friday. We're sort of moving to a summer schedule now, where we're not doing it as consistently, but yeah, so I always mess around, and whenever I've done some PA announcing and stuff. So whenever he asks, because he has a portion at the end of his show that he asks, so what do you guys have coming up? And so I'll go into, so next time on Drops of Hope Ministries.
Oh, wow. You've got one of those kind of voices. That's great.
Yeah. So,
now Nate wants to know if you can sing us out, if you've got a little song you wanted to sing.
Oh my goodness. Of course, Nate, because he's seen me. I've sing like happy birthday songs and stuff to some of our apologist friends and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I'll keep the drum away today. I don't want to scare too many folks.
Okay. Well, it's been a lot of fun. It's been great having you on here. And so I hope that you'll come back. I like your views, because I tend to, sometimes I find myself leaning different ways politically. I've leaned different ways. And I'd like to have somebody who comes in and brings that view of, hey, here's maybe a group that you haven't looked at. Here's a part of the population that we're not getting the news out on. And so, so I'm so glad that you were able to share so much with us. And even opening up our eyes about Abe Lincoln, because the very first time I heard that was on your channel just this morning. So I had never heard that about Abe Lincoln.
Yeah. It's difficult, and that's the thing is, people, just go and do the research, family. That's all I would say is do the research. And now that you've heard this from a different perspective, maybe it might shift your perspective. So,
Finding Truth wants to know, that's Santi. He wants to know if you're going to sing happy birthday to his wife.
Santi. I was on Santi's channel a while back. That was a lot of fun too. And we talked a lot about this stuff too. So, come on, Phil. Well, is she there with you? If she's there with you, I will sing the happy birthday song for her. So all I need to see is, yes, she is here.
So and Susan is saying yes. It sounds like Susan wants to hear the happy birthday song too. Yeah,
slam RN.
Well, my birthday's in a few weeks. It's coming up.
Okay. All right.
It really is. It's in July.
My wife's on the 27th actually.
Ah, mine's very close to that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. All right.
Oh, good. So we get to hear. Yeah, I'm a Leo too.
Uh-oh. Oh, she'll know about it.
we can maybe isolate this little clip from the video and use it to sing happy birthday to people.
Yeah.
Nate is very excited. Nate says, yes.
Let's see. Man, I got a bunch of songs going through my head right now. I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden.
Just when you
Yeah,
did that, you put Sweet Caroline in my head. So I've got Neil
Sweet
Diamond's.
Caroline. Da, da, da. Oh, okay. Let's see. I was just singing it the other day too, the birthday song. All right, here we go. Your head, oh, head, oh, your head, oh, head, oh, your head, oh, your head, oh, head, oh, your head, oh, heart, oh, your head, oh, heart, oh. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, Marigo. Happy birthday to you. Ya hey do ho ha hey ya ha hey ya ya hey do ya hey do hey do ho ha ya hey do ho ya hey do ho ha hey ya ha. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you, Mariko. Happy birthday to you. Ya hey do ho ha hey ya hey ya.
That is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
What's so great about that is because my kids every once in a while tune into my channel to see what's going on. And they have never seen anything like that. So that is awesome. I love it. No one's ever sang on my channel before.
Yeah, so it says happy birthday to you, and then Maragua means my friend in Hidatsa. So
very cool. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Phil. You guys, please. People are saying amen. They love it. It's awesome. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and just say my favorite thing to say. Whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. So thank you. And yes, we got lots of good feedback for your singing. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast. You guys have a great night.